Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Marcia Mode Stavros, a practitioner here on this snowy spring morning. I did see sunshine this morning, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just checking to make sure that I wasn't still sleeping or something. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you in this room and to know that there are people in so many different places and settings who are joining us this morning. So welcome to everybody. Now we get to shift gears and go into that place where we know with absolute certainty our divinity with God. I know there's an incredible life force, Father, Mother, Spirit, God, the isness, the allness, the order behind the cosmos. I know this life force to be all-providing, all-sustaining, and all-renewing. And on this day, I give grateful thanks for the seasons, for the community, for the joy of this day as it unfolds in its own unique, special, and beautiful way. I give thanks for this center, for Reverend John, for our extraordinary musicians, for those who make the doors open and brew the coffee and make sure that everything works so that we can come in and be nourished by this place. I give thanks, and together we say, and so it is. Well, believe it or not, spring is my favorite season. I love it because I love watching two seasons meet and greet each other. This morning's a perfect example. A daffodil festival yesterday, and today the daffodils are coated with snow. I don't know if the seasons are meeting and greeting or duking it out, but I love the renewal and the rebirth. And spring reminds me of one of our country's most beloved poets, the late Mary Oliver, who wrote of nature, the land, a walk in the woods, poems simple and beautiful and often woven through with her rich spirituality. As Mariah Helgeson, senior editor of On Being, wrote, "The poems of Mary Oliver are prayers that anyone can pray. They are spacious and simple, expansive and ordinary. They don't require us to believe in anything in particular, but they do ask us to pay attention to that fleeting and particular space of a moment." When interviewed on the show, Mary Oliver was asked about the spiritual life of her childhood, and she said, "Well, I would define it now very differently from when I was a child. I was sent to Sunday school, as many kids are, and then I had trouble with the resurrection, so I would not join the church. But I was still probably more interested than many of the kids who did enter into the church. It's been one of the most important interests of my life and continues to be. And it doesn't have to be Christianity or Islam. I'm very much taken with the poet Rumi, who is a Muslim, a Sufi poet. I read him every day. I have no answers, but I have some suggestions. I know that a life is much richer with a spiritual part in it." Oliver also said that when she talks about prayers, she's thinking of that oft-quoted line of Rumi's, "There are 100 ways to kneel and kiss the ground." So this morning, to mark the seasons, I want to share two of Mary's poems, both with reference to prayer. The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I happened to be standing. I don't know where prayers go or what they do. Do cats pray when they sleep, half asleep in the sun? Does the opossum pray as it crosses the street? The sunflowers, the old black oak growing older every year. I know I can walk through the world, along the shore or under the trees, with my mind filled with things of little importance, in full self-attendance, a condition I can't really call being alive. Is a prayer a gift or a petition, or does it matter? The sunflowers blaze. Maybe that's their way. Maybe the cats are sound asleep. Maybe not. While I was thinking this, I happened to be standing just outside my door with my notebook open, which is the way I begin every morning. Then a wren in the privet began to sing. He was positively drenched in enthusiasm. I don't know why, and yet, why not? I wouldn't persuade you from whatever you believe or whatever you don't. That's your business. But I thought of the wren singing. What could this be if it isn't a prayer? So I just listened, my pen in the air. And so it is. And now we get to join together, individual voices as one, and read the affirmation for May, which is red print in the insert. Please read it with me. I am a healing presence that recognizes love, wholeness, and perfection in all people and circumstances.
Thank you. So we took a vote, Alyssa, you have to move back to the valley.
Oh, okay. I just need a house.
Do y'all want to volunteer and help remove stuff today?
Careful what you say.
We can make it happen pretty quickly here. We're pretty industrious.
I miss you guys a lot. But I'm all cool, so.
Good. Well, happy Mother's Day to those that it applies to. It's such a wide topic. We're going to talk a lot about our relationships with our moms, our dads, our families, but also want to acknowledge from talking to a friend of mine this week, it's her first Mother's Day without her mom. And so that's a special kind of moment if that's you, that she, after a couple years of her mom being ill, that this is a bittersweet moment of remembering and being happy that she's no longer in distress or pain, but sad that her mom's not in the other room anymore. So let's just look at this. So, God, our families are so amazing, aren't they? Of everything they bring into it, what was that movie in the 60s, The Good, Bad, and the Ugly? And we could probably spend a whole day on each of those categories, and depending on where you are in the mood might determine which one of those categories that you would focus on any given day. But our theme for this month is feelings, emotions, and beliefs. And boy, all of those are so kind of at the core of our families, our relationships with our moms, our relationships with our dads. And it really set the stage for us, didn't it? I mean, regardless of where you are with your family relationships, it set the stage. And so Mother's Day and Father's Day is an interesting thing. You might be on one end of the spectrum where you just felt it was an amazing relationship or continues to be an amazing relationship, depending on what that is for you. the kind of moms that the other kids were always jealous of in the neighborhood. Like a very good friend of mine that we met in kindergarten, we're still good friends. Her mom just passed like 3 years ago. And 4 years ago, her mom was with her in Paris, was still physically able to do that sort of stuff, was the kind of mom that I remember that we were all jealous of because, I don't know, she just was just great. So I just have always been envious of that friend of mine that up until this time in life, God, she had her mom, and it's been decades since I've had a mom. But then there's people, let's go on the way other end of the spectrum, that people carry a lot of just emotional distress around not their family relationships, their mom or their dad. And I remember when I first came here, that I can't even remember who it was, told me that they weren't going to come to a Sunday service here on Mother's Day. And I says, why not? She says, well, it was such a painful thing for me that whenever I go to a Sunday service, they're always talking about how great it was. And it's like, it wasn't so great. And not to say it was all terrible, but she was on the other end of the spectrum of carrying so much pain about her family relationships with her mom and her dad. So I think it's good to embrace it all. That it's all good on some level, and especially for those of us that may have years of detachment from those relationships, because like, gosh, I haven't had parents or physical parents for decades. So we start to take what I think of as a bird's eye view. What was this really all about anyway? What was it all about? I've heard from several spiritual teachers that we choose our parents. And of course, in certain times I thought, did I get my second and third choice? Or was my first choice not available? And haven't you ever thought of that? And of course, it would sometimes really, emotionally like this in my house. My brother and sister and I are like, could we been adopted? And then of course I look so much like my dad. I was like, no, we can't kind of pass that one off. This is it. It's the real deal sort of thing. So there are gifts and lessons in the families that we landed in, whether we chose to or not. I don't pretend to know how that worked, but we parachuted into our families one way or another. And boy, like I say, lessons for everybody. You get a lesson, you get a lesson, you get a lesson kind of thing. So I want to look at both. Let's look at the gifts and the amazing things that your parents left you with. And even if you're on the other side of the spectrum, there is something in there to be amazingly grateful for. And if you are on this side of it, Wonder Mom, you probably still are carrying a little bit from over there. So let's look at it all. Because, again, your parents set the stage for your life, whether you realize it or not. And even if you are, like me, decades after the fact, that they've not been a physical influence, they're still an influence. But we now get to make a choice of how that influence plays out, which is great. So let's start with the good stuff. Let's start with being grateful. Here's the reason why what we have gotten from our parents are so important, but vital and effective in our life. So let's say we have these things to be grateful, the things that we're mulling over that are lessons, that our parents are so bound to us emotionally that when they have raised us up, that turns out to be like your superpower. Have you noticed? If something that your parents really affirmed in you that was great and wonderful, you will bring that with you for the rest of your life. I mean, you really will. You will, because, of course, they're your parents, and they tell the truth most of the time. But true. But the downside of that is if you've got something out of that relationship that has burdened you, you take that as deeply as the good thing they told you. So there's, like I said, the good news and the bad news. So that is why, if you are carrying anything from your relationship with your parents, it seems to be so stuck in there because they have such an influence with us. But as we look at this, here's what I found out not necessarily this week, that my superpower for my parents has helped me take care of the not so good stuff. And see if you can make that connection today. Isn't that kind of an odd irony? They gave me the superpower to deal with the baggage they also gave me. And it took me decades to figure that out. I put them in separate pots. It's like, oh, now I'm in the superpower, now I'm in that terrible stuff that we're all carrying. I thought, oh, guess what? They go together. And it's, again, this wonderful irony of using this super wonderful thing you got from them to help you deal with the other stuff that came along with it. So, as we're talking today, let's see if that's true for you. So let's talk about our superpowers. And we talk about our superpowers through stories. Chances are, if you are getting together with family today for any sort of Mother's Day-y sort of thing, you will tell stories. And you will tell probably the same stories. In fact, we relish sometimes the telling and retelling of our family stories because there's something so wonderful in them. And even if you hear a quick story from someone else that's kind of their family, a foundational story, you can't help but get something special about the person. Just heard a story this week from someone talking about their mom. It was just a short story, but it was like, I got so much out of who that person probably was because it was a family story that was important. And I thought, wow, I want to hear more. And the story's probably been told many times. But so you're going to tell a story today, most likely. And if you're not getting together with family or whatever, think of a story. And again, a foundational story. A story that somehow just means so much to you, and not only means so much to you in the love that you may have for your mom, but how it changed your life in some way. That it gave you an idea or a belief or a way at looking at the world that you have brought with you through your whole life. I'm not going to ask you to share today, but just go through the inventory. Go through the inventory and come up with that story and my challenge for you today will be to tell that story sometime today. So just kind of bring it to mind. One of your great stories. In fact, I just kind of felt the energy in the room lift up. We're thinking of our stories. So I'm going to tell you a story I've told before, and I made reference to it in my blog because it is one of my most important stories. It has changed my life. And it is a story that I heard about my mother after she died. But here's the interesting things about our parents, is that I had learned the lessons of that story through other ways, and this story kind of brought it all together, and I went, oh, this is really kind of amazing how this was a foundational story of who my mom was and a story of what she gave me. So again, you've probably heard this story, but it's an important one. Today is about retelling our stories. So my parents opened a business in the late 1940s, early 50s in Los Angeles. And my mother was a co-owner in every way that you could be a co-owner. Again, and not something that was as common in that time, wasn't it? And so, and at that point of this story, she had first two of her four kids. And again, for that generation, it'd be like, you're done, go to the kitchen, you've got two kids. But my mom was still a full owner in this business. And later on, when I was around, our house was next door to the business. And I could see as my parents were going back and forth between the business all day, my mom wasn't just sitting around. She was working the business. But in those early days, they weren't doing so well financially. In fact, the story I heard from a good friend of theirs who lifelong friends, like I said, a few years after my mom died. And this friend also told me during that time that she loaned my dad and mom $5,000 to keep their head up. Now, this is 1950s dollars. So that's a lot of money. You could buy a house for $5,000. I mean, you really could. And so just kind of think of the predicament that they were. They bought this huge building. On the second floor was a 3-bedroom apartment where they lived. And I still remember living there as a young kid before things got better and they built their house next door. And on a main street, so they had a lot on the line. And so my mom decided to, on all of this, to get a job. She was a registered nurse. And so my mom ran a business, was raising 2 kids, and was taking the bus to downtown Los Angeles to work as a registered nurse in the early 1950s. And so this is the part of the story that fascinates me, changes me, is that she, of course, took the bus. Their business was on a main street artery that led right to downtown, and she would sit at the bus stop in front of her own business to go downtown to financially save the day. And I've always thought, what went through her mind? Again, I'm thinking of having to swallow our pride a little bit, sitting on the bus stop in front of your business that wasn't doing well, which was a statement to the locals that, oh, I guess the business isn't going so well, because you couldn't say you were going shopping. She had, in those days, the starched white out thing and the starched white thing, so it's not like she was wearing scrubs for a fashion choice. It was like, oh, a nurse! Sitting on the bus stop in front of her own business. And what that has taught me is that, well, first, before I give you the lessons, move a little bit forward. When I was about 6 or 7, I found her stash hidden of Science of Mind magazines in a cupboard. So she was kind of studying what I'm studying, we are studying now, kind of on the sly, because that was kind of weird, too weird and too woo-woo in those days. And I would always go back, and there'd be like a new one. And I was 6, I couldn't even read it, but I was just so fascinated by this book. So anyway, so what I learned is that keep the larger vision of what you want to do first and foremost. Sometimes you have to do things that you would prefer not to do, like run a business, have a job, and raise children all at the same time. That your larger goal and vision is so important that sometimes you have to do that which is inconvenience. And at different times in my life that I was doing things that I would prefer not to do, that I felt it was just too difficult, I would match or put side by side my difficulty with my mom at that time, and I thought, maybe it's not so bad. And so my metaphoric lesson to myself when I get caught up in myself is just go have a seat on the bus. The bus will come and it'll take you to the place you need to go. I learned that before I heard that story from my mom in different ways, of course, because she was reading Science of Mind magazine. So it's a foundational story for me. It's an important story for me. And I know that you also have important stories within you. If you've not thought about them for a while, reacquaint yourself with them. And realize, again, depending on where, doesn't matter where you are in that spectrum of where you saw your relationship with your mom and dad and your family, that there is a good story in there that has helped you get through difficult moments. And you may not fully acknowledge that. But today is a day to acknowledge that, regardless of where you are with that relationship. That there is a story that you are carrying that makes you who you are, how you present to the world. And if you have kids, you in some way or another have passed down that story to them, whether you realize it or not. So if you can't come up with something yet, percolate on that. It's important. My guess is that you might, once the dam breaks, you'll come up with multiple stories. So let's go on the other end of the spectrum a bit. Again, the baggage we carry from our parents is so personal, isn't it? It's so personal. And for some people, so hurtful. Again, we look at feelings, emotions, and beliefs. We got it from our upbringing. And we may probably, that which we carry that has not worked for us, have probably worked to transform those feelings, emotions, and beliefs somehow. Last week, we talked again about what we carry. And I gave the analogy of, piles of stuff in your living room, which also, or the other that I talked about, boulders, where this thing that just, this junky debris you just need to get rid of. And we picked up a bit of that, I think, for our families along the way. But it's so much more personal that as I was thinking of this week, it's funny how my mind works in pictures, I got the vision of us of going to Home Depot. Do you know how they set up stuff in Home Depot? In fact, you have to really be careful in the aisles. They do it with forklifts, with pallets. And if they're going to do a end cap display, they, the forklift comes and it plops it down there. And have you ever tried to pick up a pallet even without anything up on it? You can't. So I think if what we might be carrying from our parents is like that forklift version of debris and boulders. I mean, it's like, it seems immovable. It is such an intrinsic part of us and our families that it's just like, what do we do with this? Or there's nothing to do with this. And you think, well, maybe I can chip at it, but no, there's no chipping at this. I can't even pick up the end, corner of this pallet thing. So we can get into this point that it seems beyond our ability to heal or take care of. Just like I was talking to someone a few years ago that had a lot of Home Depot pallets, I guess, from her upbringing. He says, she was in her mid-70s. He says, I still hear the voices of my parents telling me these things which were unkind. And just wondering how in the world that she could process this, move through this. So when thinking of that, I've come up with a different strategy. Rather than start at the pallet pile, to back up a bit, and this is whether it's in your family or anywhere else, the stuff that we carry. I think sometimes at our state of consciousness of being distraught over something, we go right to the thing, and at the same level of consciousness, and try to deal with it on that level. So as I was thinking of this week, to just think, let's not worry about what's on the pallet. What if we just convince ourselves that the pallet isn't ours? What if we walk out of Home Depot without taking anything with us? What if we just know that, as I said last week, the power and presence of the divine is in that pallet anyway, but I can still walk away and know it's not mine. Without trying to think it too deeply even, without going over the same issues that we may have carried along the way, with, in a sense, to just declare that I no longer own it as a place to start. Because what that really is a sneaky way to go into forgiveness. Because the way that we think of this often is that I need to know exactly what it is. I need to get an apology from the pallet or from the forklift driver, and that at some point I will come to a level of consciousness that I will absolve. Yes, I'm the bigger person now. I absolve you of this terrible thing that you did in my life. Absolution, it never seems to work, and it's not your job. We can never personally absolve anyone of anything. But what you can do is cut the cord. And cutting the cord is whatever that emotional stew that we've created, that we have tethered ourselves to, is that rather than trying to solve the stew, we can cut our cord of attachment to it. And I believe the way to start that is to come to understand, whether through prayer, through counseling, or affirmations, is that no longer belongs to me. That I let go my ownership of that. That I can bless it on its way. I can know that those who were involved that helped create that nice little display, that's theirs, no longer mine. And in doing so, that since it is no longer mine, I will no longer pass it on to anyone else. It's interesting how we do that. We take stuff and we share it, both the good and not so good. And believe me, your families will be thrilled if you no longer will share that stuff that's on the pallet. And so let's kind of do an inner experiment here. So, what's on your pallet? And again, it might be just a small thing. Something that you got from your upbringing that somehow it's still there a little bit. Maybe probably been successful to a certain extent. That maybe it was like this multiple ropes that held you, and maybe now it's like a thread. But you're still kind of like gum on your shoe. Like, what is that thing? Why do I still have it here? So look at what's on your pallet. What's your superpower? What's that great gift that you got from your family that you grew up with? Is there any way that this can help you cut the cord on this? You might not come up instantly with an answer. Can this great thing with that is such a blessing of who you are help you not solve this, but cut the cord? I've seen different movies where they're having the chase on the train track with the steam engine. Like, oh, what are we going to do with these terrible people that are chasing us? Oh, if we just pull this thing, like this train, the cabin they're on, they're not connected anymore. And you're just like, bye, see ya, hope you find another steam engine to get you up the track. But haven't you seen those movies? It's like we've been fighting them for 10 minutes when we could have just pulled the plug and waved them down the track. So this is part of to think about, rather than, I don't have to fight this anymore. Goodbye. See you later. It was nice. Well, not really, it wasn't nice, but it was like, there you go. So in any of your visualization, prayer work, or affirmation work this week, just work with it being blessed and dismissed. That you don't have to solve it anymore. Isn't that somewhat freeing? I don't have to solve it anymore. I don't have to psychoanalyze my parents anymore with some of the weird stuff they did and they left us with. We'll figure that out whenever the next step comes. To just cut the cord, pull the plug, and be fully where you are now. And I think many of us are at a certain point in life that it's probably appropriate finally that we do this. That it'd be a really good move to just cut the cord, pull the plug, and allow your superpower to fill what seems like the empty space. That you can, at that point, fully bless the family that you grew up with, even with all the warts and all, with the difficult things that may have jumped on board along the way, that you can be fully grounded in your magnificent spiritual nature. To just let it go. So as you do this week, if you're having trouble with it, visualization, use my mom. There's some things that you maybe prefer not to do or seem difficult to do. Have a seat on the bus stop. The right bus always comes. You may not know its route or where it's going, but it will take you to exactly the right place to do what you need to do. I promise you, that's how this works. So let's just take this within for a moment. And give thanks for this amazing, sunny, rainy, snowy day. Isn't it amazing we live in such an amazing place? I give thanks for it with all my heart. I give thanks for each person here. I give thanks for each person who's watching at home live stream, either live or somewhere down the road during the week. And know that we are absolutely in our perfect place right here, right now. We are filled with our own magnificent nature, which is the nature of spirit, of the divine, of the Christ consciousness. And it is who we are, not just what we express, it is who we are. And as we acknowledge that, we can't help but amplify the amazing gifts we got from the family of origin. And as we know this, we can't but help but cut the cord on anything that doesn't look like that. Let's just envision ourselves on a little mountaintop, waving it away. See you later, goodbye. All gone. As we are embracing the truth of our nature, right here, right now. And it's amazing. We might not be clear on where we were. We might not even have a clue where we're going, but it doesn't matter because our spiritual nature is right here, right now. We can never get on the wrong bus. We're always taken to the right place, and that's all we need to know. And so in this great day, we celebrate our families, our parents, our mother, and as we celebrate, we have great thanksgiving and gratitude, and we simply release this gratitude and let it go. We let it bless us, bless our families, bless the world, and as we let something go, amazing things happen. And so it is.